It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. Federal judges across the country have been getting pizzas delivered to their homes that they never ordered. It's an intimidation tactic, a way of saying, we know where you live. And dozens of judges and their families have received them. This is happening after judges rule against the Trump administration. Some judges have gotten hundreds of threatening voicemails after doing so. Threats against federal judges are on the rise, and a coalition of judges says those threats climb each time this administration attacks a ruling it doesn't like. So this week, something unusual is happening. A group of judges, appointed and elected by both parties, got on a bus. They've crossed Pennsylvania and Ohio, and they're reaching Michigan this week. They're stopping in diners and libraries and farmers markets to do the one thing their profession trains them never to do: speak out in public together about what's happening to the courts. My guest is a former judge breaking that silence. She spent 25 years on the federal bench in Michigan's Eastern District, and she got there as a trailblazer, the first African-American woman to lead the state bar of Michigan, in a profession that, when she started, had room for exactly one person who looked like her, or none. Judge Victoria Roberts, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning, Robyn. I'm certainly happy to be here with you today.
And we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
When did you notice the rise in threats against federal judges increasing?
I think it has been an ongoing thing, Robyn, and I just want to mention one name that might be familiar to a lot of people if they were Cheers viewers. Woody Harrelson's dad killed a federal judge in 1979. He was a hitman. And so I bring that up as a modern-day example of an extreme action taken against a federal judge for doing his job. And those kinds of threats have continued over the years. They certainly have been on the rise in the last several years. I believe that the Marshal's Service has tracked over 800 threats against judges in 2025. And I believe in 2026, it is averaging about 44 per month. And those threats take the form of physical intimidation. They take the form of letters that have intimidating information in them. I believe the judge that Woody Harrelson's dad killed received a package that exploded in the mail when he tried to open it. So there are various forms that those threats are taking, and the Marshal's Service does try to track all of them. They're on the bench now, I think about 2,700 federal judges, and the Marshal's Service is trying to keep track of threats that may be extended to any one of them.
So if I'm hearing you right, Judge Roberts, this is not a new phenomena. Public officials are attacked verbally often because of what they do. They're made targets because of decisions they make. And in part, that sometimes comes along with the job. But it sounds to me like you're also saying that this moment is truly different for judges.
What I'm saying is that the threats are certainly on the rise. I was part of the Judicial Security Committee on our court before I retired, and so I had intimate knowledge about what the Marshal's Service was doing to try to alleviate threats on federal judges, what the legislature was trying to do, both nationally and in Michigan, to try to provide more security for judges. That security entailed better home security systems. It entailed trying to take judges' presences off of social media so that it was harder to find out where a judge lived or those kinds of things. So there are various tools that are being used, but the most important thing is to try to keep track of them. And judges always had an obligation to report to the marshal if they got anything threatening in the mail. I did. I always reported. They always checked. And that's what the Marshal Service is doing now with all of our judges.
But why the rise is what I'm still wondering. Why are we seeing the rise in threats? Why is this a moment now where you are a part of a group of judges that are traveling on a bus? I realize you're not on the bus. You're with us here now. But this group is trying to raise awareness. This feels like a unique moment. Why?
We're trying to raise awareness not only about the threats on judges, but also to demystify what judges do, in hopes that demystifying what we do is going to educate the public, and they will appreciate that judges are merely doing their jobs when they render decisions that are unpopular.
Do you believe that threats against judges are on the rise right now because people see judges as being political, especially when it comes to their rulings?
I think that people have, for a long time, believed that judges are political. We talked about this earlier. I think that when the media is reporting on a decision rendered by a judge, for example, it's often prefaced by saying this judge was appointed by President Bush or appointed by President Clinton. So if there is going to be a report about a case an opinion that a judge issued, the media has already prefaced the political party as if that decision now is a political one rather than one that's based on the facts and based on the law. That's something we have talked about. We talked about often. Why did they report that I was appointed by President Clinton? I don't think that that's anything that is going to stop. Obviously, the media thinks it's going to get some mileage out of it. I don't know all the reasons behind it. But immediately when there is a report about what a judge does, there is a federal judge. There is also the connection made between the president who appointed that person and the opinion that they issued.
I mean, look, Judge, when you brought this up to me previously, I found it to be really quite striking. And I am someone who really wants to push people in my profession, including myself, to do our best work and to interrogate how we can be better. So I take your point, but I also want to push back a little bit because political scientists have measured it across thousands of cases. How a judge rules does correlate with the party of the president who appointed them, not in any single case, but as a pattern. So when a reporter writes appointed by Clinton, could that be part of the story? Is that something relevant to readers?
I believe that it's not relevant to readers. I can tell you that I was on a bench with people that were appointed by presidents of both parties, both of the Bushes, President Nixon even, Clinton. I left with Obama appointees. There were people on the bench appointed by Trump. And I can tell you that it's very difficult to separate out biases that people may come on the bench with, life experiences that people may come on the bench with. So maybe a correlation can be drawn between a Democrat president appointing someone with life experiences different from someone who was appointed by President Bush. I think that may be true. I came from a blue-collar background. I would not imagine and did not imagine that I would ever be appointed to the bench by either a president of either party, but I'm there. So I came with those kinds of experiences, backgrounds. There are others who have come with backgrounds that are very white-collar, very different from my urban background. And so those backgrounds cannot be separated from the person. When we impaneled jurors, for instance, we would ask all sorts of questions about what kinds of biases they may bring to their decision-making. But at the end, we asked them, can you try to separate your biases and make a decision based only on the facts, based only on the law? And I think that all of my colleagues tried to do that, even though we, at the end, may have disagreed about an opinion that a certain judge reached.
So For you, it is about, and for other judges as well, this is about acknowledging one's biases and being able to set those aside and saying, yes, I grew up in a blue-collar family and I feel this way about folks of a certain socioeconomic class because I understand, but I'm going to set that aside and try and rule in the way that I think hews closest to the law. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I think that that's the obligation that every single judge who takes that oath has and must impose on him or herself. That at the end of the day, we listen only to the facts of that case. All of the cases have laws that are supposed to govern the outcome. And it's the facts, it's the law. I might feel a certain sympathy towards a certain party. I might want in my heart a certain outcome, but it doesn't matter. And that's not the way that decisions are supposed to be made. And that's not the way that jurors are supposed to make the decisions when they have a case to decide.
Gosh, Judge, that sounds really hard.
It is hard.
That sounds incredibly hard to say, I feel for this person. I understand the many different circumstances that could have landed them in front of me right now. And yet, I feel that I have to rule in this way. What is that like?
It is a heavy responsibility. And I can give you the example of that playing out most in those kinds of cases, in the criminal cases, where we had to impose sentences on people who were found guilty, either found guilty through a bench trial by the judge or guilty by a jury. In the sentencing process, we are able to take into account certain factors in someone's background and impose a sentence that is just and fair. Somebody else may not think it is, but we have a panoply of information about people when we impose sentences, and we can take those things into account. I had a case once where a mother had introduced all of her children to a life of crime. She had them selling drugs for her when they were 7, 8, 9 years old. She prostituted herself. They were witnesses to all of these things. They became drug dealers themselves, and they're still young. And the hope is that with a sentence fashion that takes those things into account, but also holds them responsible for their criminal acts, that there is going to be a second chance in life for them to become law-abiding citizens. So there are certain parts of a case where we don't have to take all of those things out of the mix. They can be consideration for what happens.
They can or they can't be consideration for what happens. And this has me wondering how some people would then perceive that as your politics playing into the way you rule.
They might perceive it that way. But I can tell you that every judge on that bench, on my bench that I left, had the right, in fact, had the obligation to take those things into account, whether they were appointed by a Democrat president or a Republican president. And the other thing is, we had what was called sentencing counsel, and judges would, 3 of us would look over the sentencing reports of other judges and weigh in on what the sentence should be. And so I would have the influence of someone who was appointed by a Republican president. He or she had the influence of my thinking. And invariably, we would end sentencing counsel with everyone having come to the conclusion that this person's sentence should be within this certain range. So it is the benefit of having all of those voices and backgrounds that make the bench a great one, because we can influence others' thinking in situations where we have the ability to weigh in on the decision-making process.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. I'm speaking with retired federal judge Victoria Roberts about the rising threats against America's courts and a cross-country tour of judges trying to win back the public's trust and educate them about the judicial system. Judge Roberts, all of this has me thinking about one of your prominent rulings. I want to go back to early 2017. President Trump had issued his first travel ban, and airports were in chaos. People detained, families stuck, protesters and lawyers flooding the terminals. And in the middle of all that, it landed on your desk. Take me back there. What was it like?
Well, that travel ban was historic. And my court was one of a number of courts who ended up with cases that were filed by people who were stuck in airports, who were not able to get back home. So I actually had the first case that was filed, but it did not get a lot of attention as others did. And the reason it did not get a lot of attention was because I immediately brought in the lawyer representing the plaintiff in that case, the lawyer representing the government in that case, and we were able to arrive at a stipulation as to what was going to happen. The government agreed that it was not going to take certain steps, and that way, the decision-making process was short-circuited for me, because the government decided it was going to put a hold on this particular case. My case did not raise the issue of a nationwide injunction, which has been the subject of many discussions, whether district courts have the ability to issue an order that is going to govern the entire country. Because of the way we decided to handle it, it did not rise to that level, and there was not that discussion about can a district court, can a trial level judge issue an opinion that halts what is going on in the entire nation. So it was, I remember that I was in Hawaii at the time on vacation when that case was filed. We were trying to make arrangements for me to get to the federal court in Hawaii if I needed to make a ruling in that case. But because we were able to get on the phone and enter into an agreement, that whole process was short-circuited. And I think that people should know, too, how often judges are able to kind of broker those kinds of deals between parties, whether it's a criminal case or whether it's a civil case. And one of the things that this bus tour of judges is intended for is to demystify the myth. You said we're on these buses to restore trust in the judiciary, and that certainly is a big part of what the judges are intending to do. But a lot of people don't know what the judiciary does in the first place. It's not even a matter of restoring trust. It's a matter of building trust and letting them know that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government that doesn't get the same kind of attention that the other two branches get.
Isn't that, though, somewhat by design? First, I want to say, and then also I have to ask you, when you say it's not about restoring trust, it's about building trust, you're saying that the trust was never really there.
I think that it's difficult sometimes for people to have trust in a system, in anything that they don't know about. And judges don't have the ability to go on a talk show like this. I can come here only because I'm retired and I've had my First Amendment rights restored because of that retirement. But my former colleagues sitting on the bench can't do this. They can only speak through their opinions. And so they can't consent to an interview. They can't explain a decision. Everything has to be right there. And unless it's the kind of case that gets a lot of attention, people don't know about the day-to-day functioning of courts and what judges do and how important the judicial branch of government is to everyday lives, to settling disputes so that people aren't in the streets. We settle disputes all the time. When people get in trouble, what do they say? I'm going to call my lawyer. I call a lawyer. I want a lawyer. And so wanting that lawyer often leads them into court. And we just want to talk to them about that. I know that when I sat on the bench, lawyers would never, ever, ever come to the bench unless they first said, "Judge, may I approach? May I approach?" I heard it thousands of times. And then we give permission for people to come near us, not so close because they can't get past the barrier of the bench. So this tour right now is to kind of remove the barrier of the bench, to not require people to ask whether they can approach, but to go out and to approach them and to explain the system.
Judge, I want to give some voice to the people who'd say the courts earned some of the distrust that we're talking about. I'm thinking of Dobbs. I'm thinking of Citizens United. I'm thinking of Bush versus Gore. To them, judges aren't neutral. They're political actors who made political choices. What do you say to that person?
All I can tell them is that because I trust in the judicial system, I am disappointed sometimes, as many people are, with the outcomes. But I'm not going to say that all of those outcomes were politically motivated. So many of those outcomes are motivated by how a judge interprets the law to the facts in front of him or her. And that interpretation can be very, very different. We have been interpreting laws in this country that have been under debate for hundreds of years. And we are in a position to interpret those laws, and we sometimes do that in a way where people disagree. On the other side of all of those decisions that you say people disagree with, others were cheering. But it's the branch, it is what we do. We are supposed to interpret laws, apply them to facts in front of us, and people are simply going to disagree. What we are here to say is that you can't disagree in a way that brings violence to judges who are merely doing their jobs. And that's the message. We are doing what we took oaths to do, to uphold the Constitution. And that's the guiding principle for all of us. We are making those decisions. And I made decisions. I know that I made decisions that people disagreed with on any dispute. You have two parties. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to be happy, somebody's not going to be happy. And these big blockbuster decisions that you mentioned, you've got people who are happy, you've got people who are not.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. I'm speaking with retired federal judge Victoria Roberts about the rising threats against America's courts and a cross-country tour of judges trying to build the public's trust. When we come back, before any of this, Judge Roberts almost became a journalist instead of a judge. We'll discuss the single afternoon that changed her life. Stay with us. It's The Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest today is retired federal judge Victoria Roberts. 25 years on the bench here in Michigan's Eastern District. The first African-American woman to lead the State Bar of Michigan. And now part of a cross-country effort by judges of both parties to defend the courts. Before the break, we talked about the attacks on judges. Now I want to talk about how Judge Roberts got here, because it doesn't start where you'd think. Judge, long before the bench, you wanted to be a journalist. You told me you wanted to be NPR's Nina Totenberg. So how do you end up a judge instead?
I didn't want to be Nina Totenberg until after I became a lawyer and knew that Nina was a lawyer and a journalist. But I did want to be a journalist. I had spent a good part of my childhood just writing poetry, writing short stories. My favorite teachers were my English teachers. My parents neither finished high school, both blue-collar workers. Our sphere of influence, mine, was not people who were doctors or lawyers. they were factory workers. And so I didn't have that exposure. The professionals I was exposed to were my teachers, and I loved my English teachers. I loved writing. I've always been very curious about things. And so I went to the University of Michigan, and I majored in journalism, and I majored in sociology without ever a thought of becoming a lawyer.
Okay. And so that was the path that you thought you were on. You were earnestly walking that path, and what happened?
What happened was in the fall of my senior year at the University of Michigan, I was then looking for employment. I knew that I wanted to stay in the Detroit area. I wanted to be a journalist in the Detroit area. And I had an interview at the Detroit News. And I had done some work as a stringer. I had a very nice portfolio of things that I had written. And I went for that interview at the Detroit News, and at the conclusion of it, the editor said, well, you've got a wonderful portfolio of work here, but, and this is a quote, but we just hired a black reporter. And that was the conclusion of the interview, and it was the conclusion of my aspirations to be a journalist. I remember leaving that interview. I was driven there by the person I was dating who would become my husband. He was in his first year of law school at Wayne. I was bawling. I got in the car. I explained to him what had just happened. And, quote again, he said, you should go to law school to fight this kind of injustice. And it was the very first time that I had ever thought of becoming a lawyer. So it was what that editor said to me. We just hired a black reporter. And what my to-be husband said to me, you need to go to law school to fight this kind of injustice. That was the moment in time that I decided to become a lawyer. And I sort of regret that I didn't do anything in journalism after that. But it was so, it was just so shattering to me. It was shattering to me, and I did not pursue it at all. That's when I decided I wanted to be Nina Totenberg, because she combined law and journalism, and I love her, and I listen to her all the time.
How did you hold that weight of both feeling discriminated against, rejected, having your dreams shattered, and then also seeing another path forward, one that you would pave with the bricks of equity?
So I think that, Robyn, I didn't hold it. I was hurt by it. And what my husband said to me, you should go to law school to fight this kind of injustice, was very motivating to me. And a lot of my work before I went on the bench was exactly that, just to try to put myself in an area of the law where I was fighting those kinds of injustices. And it just always resonated with me that the law, on the edifice of the United States Supreme Court, it says equal justice under law. So simple, such a simply stated principle, but one that should be guiding, and it isn't. It's one that we continue to try to strive for. It's part of making our country a more perfect union, because we have the guiding principle. We just haven't been able to live up to it. And in my work, I try to practice that, equal justice under the law. And as a judge, I try to do that as well, giving the same kind of a consideration to rich, poor, white collar, blue collar, criminal, not a criminal, everything. It became so guiding to me.
You're going to bristle at this, what I'm about to ask you. To a certain degree, isn't everything political, including ruling equally under the law?
I guess that depends on what your definition of political is. I have really steered away from people trying to box me in because of the president who appointed me to the bench. I just reject that because I know that a number of decisions that I have made have pleased people of a particular party, have not pleased others. And so I just reject that. I won't pay attention to that as anyone tries to apply it to me. And I really do defend my bench, because even though I have disagreed with opinions that they have issued, I believe that everyone tries to abide by the oath that they took.
I want to end on what that looked like to build that kind of trust in your courtroom. What did that look like for you?
Building that kind of trust, you mean?
Yeah.
And well, the law as it is written is not political at all. I mean, legislators, people who belong to political parties, are the ones who are writing the law. And I wish that there were more instances now where they could agree on getting legislation passed. But there's a path that the law has taken, and it's my obligation as a judge to simply apply that law, and I try to do that. And I can remember even saying sometimes, if I wasn't bound by this law, the outcome might be different. But I'm bound by the law. And so I just try to abide by that, and I know that the other judges on the bench try to do that as well.
Last thing for you. Some judges on this tour point to Poland as a cautionary tale where the government seized the courts. You told me you'd have to ponder whether we're actually on that road, and that's fair. But if you undersell the threat, do you risk telling people to relax at exactly the wrong moment?
I don't think so, Robyn. I think that what we have to remember is that our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, 250 years old, our Constitution almost that old. And there is a rule of law that is established by those guiding documents, a rule of law. And whether those rules of law have lived up to their promise over these 250 years is certainly debatable. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," when he owned slaves. And we know that in 1776, Black people were not considered men or women. They were property. So he wrote what he knew. But he didn't include women there either. Native Americans were not included there. But as a guiding principle, all of us are created equal. I think that's what so much civil unrest has been about in this in this country. That's what so many laws have been about in this country, because we have those guiding principles. And I think the obligation is on us. We're not tearing up those documents. Those documents have worked as guiding principles. And I think our obligation is to continue to try to make it a more perfect union. I felt that was my obligation. I'm not going to abandon that. I still have hope that those documents are going to really be the rule of law for everybody in this country, for every immigrant who arrives in this country. And so they've lasted. They have been imperfectly applied, but they are perfect documents for how we should govern in this country.
Judge Victoria Roberts spent 25 years on the federal bench in Michigan's Eastern District. She's part of the Article 3 coalition, retired judges of both parties, making the case that the courts belong to all of us. Their tour has a stop in Michigan this Friday at 11:30 a.m. at the Grosse Pointe Public Library. Judge Roberts, thank you so much.
Thank you, Robyn, for having me. I've enjoyed this.
It's the Metro on WDET. Coming up, we're going to stay in the courtroom. Extra steps are being taken to protect Detroit renters. Will a new lawsuit help enforce laws already on the books, or will the status quo continue? That's next. Stay with us.